Welcome adventurers and fellow world builders. My name is Yadro and this is Yadro Gaming. Today we're going to be taking a look at the survey that I send out to my players prior to meeting for our first session. In this survey, we're going to cover a lot of different topics discussed in the previous video about setting us up on a great foundation to have a successful campaign. The success of that campaign is going to be based largely on us meeting eye to eye on a lot of things that we would like to see out of the campaign that we're about to run together. All right, here you're going to see a Google Drive doc I made just to get all of my players on the same page by sending out this questionnaire. I've got a little bit of a title here just so they orient themselves to the document that I've got here. You can pause the video if you want to take a better look at this. But basically I'm laying out kind of what style of game I'm going to be running, just to talk about TTRPGs themselves, kind of what I expect. Most of them have played with me before, so they kind of know what to expect in this. But this is just kind of the entry into the actual document itself so that they are prepared for what they're going to see. So the first question I ask on there is kind of what type of campaign do they want to run? I've got Railroad, Sandbox, Heavy Railroad, Light Sandbox, or Light Railroad, Heavy Sandbox. And that just gives me a little bit of direction on what they're expecting in terms of guidance from session to session. Now, I love running sandbox campaigns, but I know that can stress some players out. I do have one of them in this next campaign that just really wants a little bit more guidance on what they quote-unquote should be doing. And I like to tell them, we can do anything that you want to do. I've been DMing long enough that I can kind of handle anything that they throw at me. So I just want to get a perspective on what they're expecting when they actually head into the game. I like to ask what the greatest potential threat on the continent is, and then my players can reasonably assume whatever one of these gets the most votes is probably the one that we're going to be fading as the BBEG at the end of the game. So what's going to be the major threat that's coming? So I asked them to give me 2 of them so I can have a nice little outcome at the end of it. But there's all sorts of choices on here that I've given them. Dragons are always included in my campaign somewhere. They might not be like the focal point, but you can always find a dragon in any game that I run. So I always try to include that one, hence the name of Dungeons & Dragons that I'm running. So as you go through here, there's a lot of different things that they can choose, and I let them kind of dictate that, and then I build a campaign around it. So whatever one is the biggest, most problematic piece is probably going to be the final culmination of the campaign, but then the other ones that rank higher than others, I'll have them be a point of focus as we go through the game. So I also ask if there's any themes they would like incorporated into the campaign. And I ask for, 1 to 3 of these just so they can give it to me, so I have an idea of what they would like me to include. I mean, if they want excessive dungeoneering, if they want horror, if they want to be a part of a guild and have that included. I also include, do you want something interesting like the absence of gods? Do you want a survival campaign? Do you want magic to be illegal? So different things to kind of wrap their heads around of, these are actually possibilities that we can help dictate as we go through here. I just find it's an important question to ask just so I can also include a little bit of those things they're interested in. I think this one is pretty important because it's going to vastly change how the game is played, but I'd like to ask how common magic should be. If we want a very, very magical campaign, which I've done in the past, things can get pretty complicated pretty quickly and your players can get pretty powerful. If it's virtually non-existent, a lot of players are a little bit torn on that because then it just feels like I'm just a person out in the environment, but I want cool magic stuff. So I try to find out kind of where our range is on there, and usually we end up in the moderate to common sort of range. I like to get them thinking about, how long do we want this campaign to be? If we have some new players and they just want to do a shorter style campaign, maybe level 1 to 4, I can work with that. Most players kind of want to be that 8 to 10, 11 to 14 range because the game kind of starts to break when you get beyond that, especially when you get into the higher levels and the higher spells of casters versus, martial characters. But I'd like to know where our head's at if we're actually trying to shoot for that longer form campaign or if we want to keep it a little bit shorter and more manageable. For newer players, this was a more important question with how comfortable they are with in-character role-playing. But for now, I kind of know where everybody's at, but I like to get a temperature reading just to see how things have changed as they've progressed through the game. How comfortable are you with the DM using your backstory to make specific mini-arcs? This is something that I basically build my whole games around. Whatever they provide me in their backstories or whatever we do in the session 0 and discuss there, that is how I build out the entirety of my campaign. I kind of lay out a skeleton outline of where we have the main conflict that's coming through, and then I look for ways to weave in their backstories throughout and try to build a little path for them to take through the game, at least as I expect it, and then it's up to the players to either bite on those hooks or to leave them and ignore them. Some of these I know are common things that I don't want to deal with. Like I don't want excessive gore, sexual assault, or slurs in my campaign. Those are typically pretty well accepted, and I just have that up front as we're not going to do them. And then is there anything else that you would like? They're able to answer that as in-depth as they would like to, and then I can go through and make sure that I don't include that, and I'll share those results with the players as well, so they kind of know what to expect too. I have quite a few homebrew items on here that I like to share as well. Some of these you may have heard before, some maybe not. Critical hits, I always do max damage on the dice when they roll it, and then they can roll their dice afterwards. Potions are a bonus action, which is pretty common. Whenever I have them level up, they can re-roll 1s and 2s on their hit dice. I don't coup de grace players, so if they're down, I don't intentionally try to kill them because the enemies don't see them as a threat. Whenever my players take a long rest, I allow them to recover all hit dice, spell slots, and player abilities, not just half of their hit dice, rules as written. So that's something I do in my game because I like to have bigger, punchier sort of fights. Player characters can die. I've never had a TPK in one of my games, so total party kill, but I have lost 4 PCs in like this large world that I've built of all my campaigns run together. But I do want my players to know that you can die, so don't make bad decisions, because that'll be on you eventually, or if the dice roll against you, that's just kind of what happens. When I DM, I usually take the average damage dice when monsters attack, but I do give my, that just really speeds things up from the DM perspective, so I'm not rolling a million dice behind the screen. But I do let my players know if they start to metagame that, or if they start to say, oh, he only does 9 damage when he hits, I have 10 health, I'm good. I may start to roll then, or I'll just change the damage that they can do on their attacks. As long as the players are being respectful, I will as well, but I just want to keep the game and combat moving. I let them know that running away is a totally fine strategy. A lot of players think that, like, no, I'm here, I have to fight, I have to kill this. Well, if things go poorly, get out of there. Like, it's totally normal to say, like, we can't deal with this, we don't want anyone to die, let's get out. And they can actually do that as a strategy, so I want to be upfront about that. When it comes to world building, and I'm going to cover this in another video, I actually take them through a game called The Quiet Year, and it just helps us build out a little settlement. The first campaign I've done since I moved, we actually were a settlement, like defected from a major kingdom, and we like rebuilt society as they wanted to in this new region. The second campaign we did, some of the survivors returned to the kingdom, and we world built there of the area around where the kingdom actually was. And now in this next campaign, we're going to be moving on to a totally new region, and we're going to be running this game, but with multiple settlements that they're going to be talking about and building. I'll explain more of this later. I typically have food and alcohol at my games. I just want to make sure everyone is comfortable with that. If anyone has a problem with it, I'll adjust accordingly. But I know that everyone's fighting their own battles, and if there is going to be an issue with alcohol, then I just want to make that up front so we can address it early on. I don't allow PvP in my games, player versus player. I think that we should just be respectful of one another and just not decide to go down that path. Finally, I do have some spell restrictions now. Wish has been taken away by the gods because it's just too game breaking. And if it was allowed for my players, then there'd probably be quite a few wizards out there and sorcerers that are just creating massive amounts of gold every day and wrecking the world economy, or just becoming gods themselves, and that's a problem. Additionally, I've had a player in the past take Simulacrum, and they were able to kind of daisy chain those Simulacrums, so they were just had an army of wizard copies of themselves, and I said, maybe we're not going to do that this game. So I put that on my ban list as well, so anyone that's going to try to be a caster knows that ahead of time. This is kind of a fun one. A couple different content creators are going through this. Taking 20 is who I borrow most of this from, but I like to ask them what kind of problem player are they. This is just so they can kind of self-reflect on where they might cause issues at the table. And by bringing it out in the light like that, it gives me an opportunity later on to say, hey, you're being kind of a rules lawyer right now. Can we handle this afterwards? Or if someone's being a spotlight hog and not letting other people speak up, if people are metagaming, which is a really common one. It's just a way for me to have that conversation early on with them, so then it's a little bit more comfortable of a transition layer. That one's kind of optional, but I think it's good to include just so we have the conversation early. I like to ask if there's any magic items that they would like to see in the campaign. Doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily put them in, but it gives me an idea of kind of where their head's at when it comes to hoping for these things to show up at some point. One of the games we ran, there were just a ton of rat folk everywhere. So it's kind of this running joke that these rat folk were everywhere and they were taking over the continent. And I was in the session, I was yelling like, guys, I'm not going to have rat folk in the next one, I promise. So I included this line so they can just say like, I'm just tired of this monster. And like everyone jokingly put rat folk on there that they were done with it. So I was like, all right, I won't put them on. But that's just a good one to include just in case, like people just got out of a goblin heavy campaign or something and they just want to try something new. I give them a chance to give me a monster that they've always wanted to fight. That's always a fun one. This one's just for me, just for them to tell me about their worst experience in a TTRPG and what they want to avoid. I just like to hear horror stories. It's just kind of fun for me to kind of revel in, having not been a part of it, but I've also had a fair share of them myself. But it's just interesting to see what other people think. I also like to ask, what do they hope to experience in the game? There's a lot of tables out there, and I just want to know why they want to come back to mine. All 6 players are returning, so it just gives me a little bit of an insight about what they really enjoyed and what do they like about my style. Feels a little self-serving, but it is kind of nice to hear about what they actually do like at the table. So I do want to hear about their favorite character that they've ever run for me. I've only included this one because I have these players at the table. Again, it's kind of a self-serving question to ask, but it's just fun for me to let them relive what those highlights were and what we could try to do in another game. Okay, so now we'll go on to the results. These are the 6 responses I received from my players. So we'll see what kind of game we're going to run. Turns out they really like a light railroad, heavy sandbox. Awesome. I'm going to share that with them so they know. When we get to the major threats on the continent, they really wanted something extra planar, which is kind of interesting. Additionally, they want some big bad monsters roaming around, like titans or just things that are way too strong for them. So the world feels kind of big and lived in, I think. And then they gave me a whole bunch of fodder to just building the game out. I mean, they might start off with the beasts of the wild being a problem. When they get to a certain level, they might not be so bad anymore. You'll see in my little adventuring hook that I created for them, but the possibility of war is real. There's warring gangs, potentially. Gods are always an issue. So a lot of different things I can play with here. And then when I finally implement them, I think some of the players are going to get really excited and just think like, oh yes, like that's what I wanted. Now it's here and we're playing it. It's so cool. So in terms of the themes they wanted incorporated in the campaign, pretty spread out here, but at least I got multiple votes for most of them. Travelers of the Plains is going to be one that I haven't really done a whole lot in the past. So we might be going to some of like the Plane of Water, maybe the Astral Sea. We might be going to the Shadowfell, Feywild. I haven't really thought that far ahead yet because I don't know what decisions they're going to make along the way, but I think that's an interesting one. So I'm going to have to do a little homework and read up on the planes that they're looking at going into. I'm really interested that they want to do a large city or have a home base. Kind of a central location maybe where they can keep coming back to and get to know some of the NPCs. So that'll be something different from the first 2 campaigns I ran for them. I'm excited to run a bigger world. I think that'll be fun for them to kind of see what's out there and meet a bunch of new people in different places and find a way to incorporate some dungeons. We haven't really done a whole lot of that. We've just kind of been on the overworld, kind of traveling to the woods. So I'll make sure I build that in too. And we did have 1 vote for an evil campaign. I didn't plan on actually running that one. That would just be like a one-shot or a short-shot series for them to try out. It's just really hard to run an evil campaign, and I don't want to lose any friends from having them all get at each other's throats. Like I said, moderate is going to be the one that stands out here. Common is pretty high up there as well, but it looks like we're going to have quite a few magic items in the campaign. It also looks like we're going to be running a long campaign. The majority of the table wants to do a level 15 to 17 campaign, which is also very difficult to do. I'm down to try it, but we'll see how the party chemistry is when we actually get playing, because we actually had 1 vote for an 18 to 20, which I've only done once ever, taking a group from 1 to 20. So I'd really like to try to do it again. But again, we'll have to see how they play when they're together. How comfortable are you with in-character role-playing? So this is lower than I expected because I actually have a table that's pretty good at role-playing. I think we're just lacking a little bit in confidence. We have a couple that are very comfortable, some people that have been involved in the theater a little bit, some comfortable ones of people kind of getting out of their shell. But I suspect that the somewhat will increase as we play more games together. They just need a little more time playing the game. I knew this one was going to be high with very comfortable. Having played, 2 to 4 campaigns with me in the past with all of these players, they kind of know what my style is. And I've done some pretty cool things with backgrounds in the past. So normally they're all very excited, like, oh, I want my thread pulled on immediately. Like, let's delve into my character's backstory. And that normally makes some of the most memorable moments for that player and their character. So I kind of expected that one to be very high. I talked with this player afterwards when the hard limits of no killing their character. He just wants to go down to 1 HP instead. He just said that was a joke. So I did touch base with him just to make sure, like, hey, are you okay? Like, do you feel like I'm targeting you? And he's like, oh, no, sorry, man. I was just, I'm just messing with you. And I was like, okay, good to know. We are going to be adding slave labor and anything that is parallel in the Holocaust, which I didn't have a plan on doing that anyway. But I'll talk to the table about that to make sure that we're not going to do that either. But it's good to know. Seems like I covered everything in my initial things, but if anything comes up, they know that they can talk to me. No complaints about my homebrew, which is great to see. This is a really interesting one. So now I know what kind of problem players are at my table. Looks like we have a lot of jokesters, which I could have predicted this. They're not that bad, but there are quite a few players at the table that just love to, like, crack a quick joke and then say, I'm sorry, okay, go ahead. Which is fine. It can kind of keep things light, but I've also had to kind of give them a look of, like, come on, we're in the middle of something. Maybe let's not lean into that too heavily, and then they get back in line and everything's great. We have a metagamer. We have a boss critic. And then we have a flippant player that typically goes on their phone a little bit, or they lose their track of time, or they're a little bit late to sessions. So knowing these and knowing the players that I have, I'm not overly concerned with any of these, just because I know the players. If you are uncomfortable dealing with, like, you had a cheater on there, someone that likes to fudge dice rolls or grabs the dice before you can see it, that might be a little bit more of a problematic characteristic of one of your players. If you have a couple spotlight hogs, they might really bump their heads as they play through the game. Or if you had a whole table of flippant players, that might be a little bit of a, maybe not a red flag, but a pink flag that you'll have to kind of keep your eye on as the game progresses. But I just think this is interesting to see and have people self-identify. And I will say that I don't necessarily agree with these 6 for the players that I have at the table. I probably would have ranked them differently if I was going to rank them myself. All right, now magic items wish list. This character wants to bounce around the field a lot. I think that they're going to be playing a rogue, possibly a soul knife, so I could see how that would help them. I know exactly who this is without even looking up who submitted it. Someone really likes to increase their stats. This individual wanted to play like a pirate, but they have since kind of gone back on that, and they've changed kind of the character vision they have, so I don't know if those are still applicable. And then mundane items are always fun, just to have them to experiment with and be creative with, so I'm excited for that one. No creatures to avoid. A couple different things to look here. Someone really wants to go after a god. He was kind of a villain in the last game that we did, at least his son was, so we had to deal with that. I've never thrown a mimic at my players before, but apparently they hunger for it, so we'll see if I end up doing that at them. Mind flayers are always going to be fun, and hags or vampires could always be fun as well. So that's just some neat little ideas that I can throw into the campaign, maybe sprinkle them in if I see an opportunity to do so. So this kind of wraps up what I expected for session 0, to kind of get everybody on the same page and to find out what kind of game they want to run. From here, I let the players know what kind of game won out, where the majority was, and what the percentages were, and what they can expect. If anyone doesn't want to play that game, we can talk about it, or maybe adjust things a little bit, but everyone was pretty much on board, so we know what we're going to play. I hope you enjoyed seeing how the survey was made. All the information that I received from that survey, as demonstrated today, is going to directly go into the campaign that I'm about to run with my players. I'm hopeful that you got to see how it was done and how you can implement it in your games as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you saw today, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and share this with whoever you think might be interested. I'll see you in the next video. And remember, why be a player when you can be a god?